Hope was never weakness in the beginning. It was purity. It was the empath's greatest strength. It was the reason they stayed when others would have walked away. They didn't stay because they were foolish. They stayed because they believed in potential. They saw the good inside people even when that good was buried under pride, trauma, ego, or immaturity. An empath doesn't fall in love with who someone is. They fall in love with who that person could become. And that is where hope quietly turns dangerous. Because hope makes you patient beyond reason. It makes you excuse behavior you would never tolerate from a stranger. It makes you translate disrespect into they're just hurting. It makes you interpret inconsistency as they're just confused. It makes you carry emotional weight that was never yours to carry. The empath keeps thinking, if I love harder, understand deeper, stay longer, something will change. But love does not transform someone who does not want to transform. The empath keeps watering a garden where the soil has already decided not to grow. They give reassurance when they need reassurance. They offer understanding when they crave understanding. They become the safe place for everyone else, while silently standing in emotional storms alone. And every time reality tries to show them the truth, hope steps in and says, not yet. Don't give up yet. That is the softest weakness of an empath. Not that they feel too much, but that they believe too long. They hold on to apologies that were never followed by change. They hold on to promises that were never supported by action. They hold on to memories of who someone was at the beginning, ignoring who that person is now. Hope stretches their limits. Hope convinces them to endure what their intuition has already warned them about. And one day they realize something powerful. Hope without evidence is self-abandonment. That realization is painful. But it is also the beginning of strength. An empath does not love halfway. They do not care in small portions. When they show up completely. They listen beyond words. They read between silences. They sense tension in a room before anyone speaks. And because they feel so deeply, they naturally give deeply. Their energy becomes a resource for everyone around them. Their time becomes flexible. Their emotional availability becomes constant. But here is the quiet truth no one talks about. Constant giving without conscious limits slowly becomes self-erasure. At first, it feels noble. It feels loving. The empath reassures themselves that this is what love is supposed to look like. Sacrifice, patience, understanding. They become the therapist in relationships, the mediator in conflicts, the emotional anchor in chaos. When someone is overwhelmed, they absorb it. When someone is angry, they soften it. When someone is broken, they try to fix it. But energy is not infinite. When appreciation is absent and reciprocity is inconsistent, something begins to drain. The empath starts waking up tired, not physically, but emotionally. Conversations feel heavier. Apologies start sounding repetitive. Promises begin to feel recycled. And yet they keep giving because stopping feels like betrayal of their own nature. That is the trap of emotional overinvestment. You start confusing your ability to endure with your responsibility to endure. The empath gives reassurance while silently craving it. They send long messages explaining their feelings while receiving short replies in return. They plan, they initiate, they check in, they adjust, they accommodate. And when conflict arises, they are the first to self-reflect, the first to apologize, the first to try again. Over time, the imbalance becomes undeniable. It's not one dramatic moment that breaks them. It's the accumulation, the late-night overthinking, the repeated dismissals, the subtle lack of effort, the feeling of being needed but not truly valued. They realize they are being relied on but not poured into, supported but not supported back. And exhaustion begins to whisper what hope once silenced. You cannot keep setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You cannot keep filling cups that are never refilled. You cannot keep investing in a connection that only grows on one side. Emotional overinvestment does not destroy the empath immediately. It slowly thins their spirit. It teaches them the hard lesson that love without boundaries becomes depletion. And when the soul grows tired enough, clarity arrives. There is a moment in every empath's journey that does not look dramatic from the outside. No shouting, no final argument, no slammed doors. It is quiet, almost invisible. But internally, it changes everything. It is the moment awareness replaces illusion. For a long time, the empath survives on interpretation. They interpret mixed signals as hidden affection. They interpret distance as stress. They interpret inconsistency as fear. They build explanations for behavior that was never explained to them, not because they enjoy confusion, but because their heart prefers meaning over chaos. If they can understand it, they can endure it. But patterns are louder than promises. At some point, repetition becomes undeniable. The same apology, the same disappointment, the same cycle of closeness followed by withdrawal. The empath begins to notice that words and actions are not aligned. They begin to see that effort appears only when they pull away. They begin to realize that their loyalty has been predictable and therefore taken for granted. This is where awareness begins to rise. It does not scream. It whispers. It says, "You've seen this before." It says, "This isn't confusion, this is consistency." And when that whisper gets stronger, illusion starts losing its grip. The empath stops defending the other person in conversations. They stop making excuses in their own mind. They stop writing reality to protect someone else's image. Clarity can feel cruel at first, because clarity means admitting that the version of the future you hoped for may never exist. It means accepting that potential is not reality. It means acknowledging that love alone cannot carry something that requires two people. And the hardest part, the empath knew all along. Their intuition had been signaling quietly, the discomfort, the subtle anxiety, the feeling of imbalance, but hope kept muting it. Awareness turns the volume back up. Suddenly, what once felt complicated becomes simple. If someone wants to show up, they do. If someone values you, it is visible. If someone cares, you do not have to decode it. There is grief in this awareness. Not just grief for the person, but for the fantasy. For the version of them that existed mostly in your heart. Letting go of illusion feels like losing something real, even if it never fully was. But awareness is power, because once you see clearly, you cannot unsee. Once the empath recognizes patterns instead of promises, they stop negotiating with reality, they stop fighting for potential, they begin preparing for detachment. And that quiet shift is the beginning of transformation. When the empath begins to detach, people rarely understand it. They call it cold. They call it distant. They say, "You've changed." And they're right, but not in the way they think. The empath hasn't become heartless. The empath has become aware of their own limits. Detachment is not a personality shift. It is self-protection finally activating. For so long, the empath believed that love meant endurance, that loyalty meant staying, that understanding meant tolerating. They thought boundaries were walls, and walls meant disconnection. So they kept their heart open even when it was being mishandled. They kept access unlimited even when that access was abused. But detachment is not about closing the heart. It is about guarding it. It begins subtly. The empath stops reacting immediately. They stop explaining themselves in paragraphs. They stop chasing conversations that feel one-sided. Where they once rushed to fix tension, they now pause. Where they once absorbed blame, they now observe it. That pause, that space is not indifference. It is discipline. Detachment teaches the empath that compassion does not require self-sacrifice. That you can understand someone's pain without volunteering to carry it. That you can love someone and still decide they no longer have access to you in the same way. And this is where emotional maturity rises. Because true maturity is not about feeling less, it is about managing what you feel. The empath still cares. They still see the good. They still understand the wounds behind behavior. But they no longer allow that understanding to override self-respect. They no longer confuse empathy with obligation. People often become uncomfortable when the empath detaches. Not because the empath is cruel, but because the dynamic has shifted. The over-giving has stopped. The constant reassurance has slowed. The emotional availability that once felt guaranteed is now measured. And when access changes, people feel it. But detachment is not revenge. It is restoration. It is the empath choosing peace over potential. It is choosing sleep over overthinking. It is choosing silence over unnecessary explanations. It is choosing to invest energy where it is reciprocated. For the first time, the empath is protecting their own nervous system, their own heart, their own time. They are no longer trying to prove their worth through endurance. They are no longer negotiating their standards to keep someone comfortable. Detachment does not make them colder. It makes them clearer. And in that clarity, they finally realize something powerful. Loving yourself sometimes looks like stepping back, not stepping in. When the empath comes back, it is not the same return people expect. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not fueled by revenge or anger. It is quiet, grounded, centered. The empath who returns after detachment is not the one who once begged for clarity or chased reassurance. This version is composed, selective. Before, their presence was constant. They were always available, always ready to talk, always willing to fix what felt broken. Their love was loud in effort. Their loyalty was visible in pursuit. But now something has shifted. They no longer feel the urge to prove how much they care. They no longer feel responsible for holding everything together. They have learned what silence can teach. The empath who comes back does not over-explain. They do not argue to be understood. They do not chase closure from someone who never offered consistency. They have made peace with unanswered questions. And that peace makes them powerful. Their energy feels different, calmer, more contained. They still care, but access to that care is earned, not assumed. Conversations become intentional, time becomes valuable, emotional availability becomes selective. The same heart exists, but it is no longer unguarded. And this is where the shift becomes noticeable to others. The people who once relied on the empath's endless patience begin to feel the absence of it. The ones who dismissed their concerns now notice the distance. The ones who assumed they would always stay now sense something they cannot control: indifference. Not bitterness, not hatred, just emotional neutrality. That neutrality unsettles those who were comfortable with the old version, because when an empath stops reacting, stops chasing, stops explaining, the dynamic changes completely. The power balance resets. The person who once felt secure in the empath's unconditional presence now feels the weight of uncertainty. But the empath is not trying to create that feeling. They are simply protecting their peace. They have learned that love without reciprocity is depletion. That understanding without boundaries is self-abandonment. That loyalty without respect is imbalance. So when they return stronger, not hardened, strengthened. They are no longer reachable through guilt. They are no longer influenced by temporary affection. They are no longer swayed by words without action. The empath who comes back is still compassionate, still intuitive, still capable of deep love. But now they are anchored. They choose who gets access. They choose when to invest. They choose when to walk away. And that quiet strength makes them unreachable to the same patterns that once drained them. There is a moment that feels like loss, but is actually liberation. It is the moment hope quietly steps aside and acceptance takes its place. Not dramatic acceptance, not bitter surrender. Just a calm, steady recognition of what is instead of what could be. And for the empath, this is where real power begins. Hope once kept them holding on. It whispered, maybe tomorrow will be different. It suggested that one more conversation, one more chance, one more act of understanding could finally shift everything. Hope kept the door slightly open, even when exhaustion had already entered the room. But when detachment matures, hope no longer leads. Clarity does. Acceptance is not giving up on love. It is giving up on forcing it. The empath reaches a point where they stop arguing with reality. They stop trying to convince someone to value them. They stop explaining why consistency matters. They stop shrinking their needs to maintain connection. There is no anger in this stage, only certainty. And certainty is powerful. Because when you no longer hope for someone to become who they have repeatedly shown they are not, you stop negotiating your worth. You stop investing energy into potential. You stop attaching your peace to someone else's growth. You release the illusion that you can love someone into transformation. That release feels heavy at first. There is grief in it. Grief for the future you imagined. Grief for the effort you gave. Grief for the version of the connection that existed more in your heart than in reality. But underneath that grief is something steady: self-respect. When hope dies, self-trust is born. The empath begins to trust their intuition instead of overriding it. They trust pad of promises. They trust actions instead of apologies. And with that trust comes independence, emotional independence. They no longer wait for reassurance to feel secure. They no longer wait for validation to feel valuable. They understand that walking away is not failure. It is alignment. Power is not loud. It does not need to announce itself. It shows up in boundaries. It shows up in silence. It shows up in the ability to say, this no longer serves me, without needing anyone to agree. The empath who replaces hope with acceptance does not lose their softness. They refine it. They do not lose their love. They redirect it. They do not become cold. They become intentional. And in that intention, they finally reclaim the one person they were neglecting all along: themselves.